Good evening, Azeroth, and welcome to episode 132 of the World of Goldcraft. I'm your host, as usual, the Lazy Goldmaker of thelazygoldmaker.com, and we'll be talking about gold making for about 20 minutes, as usual. If you're following along live, make sure you post the questions in chat if you have any, and I'll answer them at the end. And if you're not following it live and you want to, you can do so at twitch.tv/lazygoldmaker, and I do this on Wednesdays at about 2 p.m. Central European summertime. So yeah. Now, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the game. And right now, the Dark Moon Fair is still in town for a couple of more days. So if you're someone who wants to take advantage of that for getting the items that you can get during the Dark Moon Fair, there's also some items that sell better during Dark Moon Fair. I don't personally know which, because I don't do any Dark Moon Fair related gold making. I like to stick to stuff where I don't have to remember the calendar days. But there are definitely opportunities both to pick up items cheaply, to flip items right now. I saw that Hikons has had some success resetting the market for the quest items that you can turn in during the Dark Moon Fair that drop from dungeons. And there are some other opportunities as well related to the replica transmog. You may be able to find the Dark Moon pets cheaper this week. So just keep your eyes peeled, and if you want to dive into that, then you can check out like full guides on what the Dark Moon Fair brings. And that's definitely one of the slightly longer duration cyclical events in WoW that you can take advantage of from a gold making point of view. Outside of that, there's not much. PTR is rolling onwards very slowly. The same for the TBC beta. There was a potential leak on the launcher with a launch date of 1st of June for TBC, which seems incredibly unlikely. You would expect that they would have announced something by now if that was the case. Might be the pre-patch. We will have to see, but I'd be very surprised if TBC launches on June 1. You would think they'd want to hype that up and give people some time to get back into the game and test it out. So yeah. That's about it for what's going on with the game. And now we wanted to go into the discussion point. So what I wanted to talk about today is actually Classic, or it impacts both games, but it's perhaps more noticeable on Classic right now. Because recently there's been, or over the last couple of months, there's been a huge increase in GDKP runs in WoW Classic, or Gold DKP runs. And obviously this is, and the controversy is obviously related to bots and the entire like gold economy in Classic WoW in particular. The GDKP runs, or Gold DKP, is essentially a raid group, a pug group, where every item that drops is auctioned off to the highest bidder in the raid. And since you have Master Looter in Classic, this is obviously works quite well. So the raid is then going to be composed of some people who are just there for gold, who are good geared and will carry the raid, and some people who are there to spend gold to gear out their characters. And some people who might be in a position of doing both, where they might need some items, and so they'll either get gold or they'll be able to buy some of the items they need. So this is essentially the Classic version of selling boosts. And what do people do in retail WoW all the time? They sell boosts. Anyone who's seen Trade Chat and has heard me talking about this will know. There's boosts going on all the time in retail, and now it's going on in Classic as well, if in a slightly different form, but it's the exact same concept. You're paying gold to guarantee that you gear up faster, essentially. And it's just that there's some differences in the game, and if there was Master Loot in Classic or in retail, we might have seen Gold DKP retail runs as well. People might be pugging some bosses to guarantee that they can buy their 220 Kabbalist Hymnal or whatever they need from Sire Denathrius. So the gold per hour from doing Nax runs with the GDKP group can be pretty high. Now for the older raids, it's not going to be as high because no one's going to pay loads of gold for like Soul Grub loot, but for next they're going to pay a lot of money. And since it's Master Looter, it's quite consistent. If you have the most money in the raid, you can buy whatever item you want. You'll get it. And obviously the controversy isn't in this in itself. Like selling gear has always perhaps been something that a lot of people look down on. I don't personally as much. I don't think it's that bad in isolation that people can sell player power, and I actually think that at least in retail WoW, there's a little that players should be allowed to sell a little more player power directly through just BOE items, preferably crafted high level items. But that's beside the point. The point is that the reason this is controversial is because a lot of people say that Classic has a huge botting problem. I haven't seen it, but I haven't tried looking for it either personally. But it's at least a huge perceived problem with botting and gold selling. And thus the perception is that GDKP is just a way for bots to launder their gold, and for essentially legitimate players will get gold from bot farmers who buy gear, and that's really bad for the game. Now, obviously, the problem here isn't the gold DKP runs. The problem is obviously the botting and the selling of gold. But I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not sure if that's the main problem. But I don't know how bots operate in Classic. I don't know what types of farm they do, or how efficient they are. But I do know that regardless of botting, there would still be a huge amount of gold available in Classic right now. Even if no one had ever botted Classic WoW, there would be absolutely huge amounts of gold available right now. Enough to fund probably almost at the same level. And why is that? Well, it's because of the extreme advent of mage AoE farming, and particularly dungeon boost farming. Which means that as long as you can maximize your lockouts per hour, you are not limited by the game world or any sort of resource limitation outside of your ability to do the boost. And stuff like Mara Boost, where they kill tons and tons of mobs that drop gold, they drop vendor gold, that generates a lot of gold into the economy. And there's a lot more players doing AoE farming than there ever was in actual vanilla. And that's generating a lot of raw gold. And let's face it, like, there's a lot of gold. There's not that much gold being spent in the Classic economy. Like, what is actually taking gold out of the economy? There's not much. It's repair costs, it's respecking, it's auction house fees, it's whatever you buy from a vendor. There's not much you buy from a vendor at max level. The gold sinks in Classic are so small outside of like one-off expenses like epic mounts. And that's just the case. Like, there aren't large gold sinks anymore that take gold out of the economy. So it's all just being traded around. Like, people, obviously, like, consumables and everything else that you need for raiding is expensive, but it's all gold you're just trading with other players. So it never leaves the economy. It's just being concentrated into the hands of alchemists or farmers or whatever. And that's just this. Because of the very low amount of gold sinks in Classic WoW, it was inevitable that we'd see a huge amount of inflation long term, and a huge amount of just increases in the gold supply, and just way more gold being flowing around in the economy. And of course, right now everyone is farming gold because there's really not much else to do. And they're reading guides about TBC that says you have to bring in 20,000 gold to go into TBC. I saw that on the Classic WoW Reddit, where like some guy had gotten a whisper because he wanted to join one of these gold DKP runs. But there was like 1,000 gold minimum to join. And he's like, I didn't have 1,000 gold. And it was like, what? You don't have 1,000 gold? That's not even a lot. You need 20,000 gold to even play TBC. And it's like, you don't need 20,000 gold to play TBC. You need 20,000 gold if you're planning to buy everything day one, including like full previous profession gear. But not everyone cares about that. But the point is that regardless of botting, there would be a stupid amount of gold in circulation, and there is a stupid amount of gold in circulation relative to the active player base. And the player base, the people who are still playing Classic, are way more likely to be hardcore Classic players than to be casuals. And thus, they're way more likely to be filthy rich than the people who quit. So for me personally, I don't think botting is like the main part of this problem. Like the Classic economy was, people talk about like the Classic economy being bad or destroyed or scuffed or whatever adjective they want to use. By too much gold being put into it and thus resources becoming too expensive, such as herbs and other things. But it's not that. Like, it's the Classic game world. It has limited spawns. There's no layering. There was layering. There's no shards. So the number of herbs is like hard capped to the number of layers and the people farming herbs. And when you have people who want to run consumables for every raid, and there's a limited amount of herbs, then the price has to go up. It's just simple supply and demand. And it's going to go up to whatever equilibrium where all of the people who are this level of hardcore can afford it. And that's the amount of herbs that they need per week to raid. So that's why materials are expensive. It's just supply and demand, and the fact that most supply is capped in Classic due to how the game world works. And then you have the fact that there's just absolutely huge amounts of gold flowing into the game through farms that very few players did back in the day, and now everyone is doing it. I remember reading the Classic Reddit earlier in the life cycle where like literally all of the warriors, everyone was like, how do you make gold in Classic? And it's like, just make a mage alt and farm on it. And there are so many people doing that. And that generates a huge amount of gold, and that's really how it is. For the people who are mad about this, I think they'll have to live with it. The boost meta is here to stay in retail, and the gold DKP meta is probably here to stay in Classic as well. Once people get a taste of it, and once it's been normalized at this point in vanilla, I think you can expect to see gold DKP make a return much earlier in TBC than it did in Classic. I think you'll start seeing gold DKP runs relatively early in the life cycle of TBC, particularly for the easier instances. Now, personally, I think gold DKP looks a lot more fun because you can just sign up with gear and you get to watch the auctions and be like, oh yeah, oh cool, the super good item dropped. Now we might get rich. Rather than like the boosting conveyor belts of retail, which is really, really boring. Now there is a question though, is this healthy for the game economy? And personally, I don't think the gold DKP runs are boosting. I'm not sure if it's healthy or unhealthy. For many players, for the people who play the game like normally by being in a guild and raiding with a guild and having a loot system within their guild, I think the larger existence of this thing just doesn't really matter. People will blame this for prices going up, but as I said, I don't think this really has anything to do with it because it's just leading to gold redistribution. If anything, it's making the hardcore raiders richer so they can afford more consumables, I guess, but they'll still be capped by the amount of boss wipes they have per week, essentially. And in TBC, we'll probably all be using flasks rather than elixirs that go out every time you die. So overall, like the number of herbs you need for a raid night is probably quite a bit lower in TBC than it was in Classic. A bigger issue is if a very large amount of the raw gold that's generated is being generated by a smaller number of players that are doing mage AoE farming or bots, then there is an issue. Because it means that those players will have so much more buying power than players who don't do those things. And that means that there will be a very uneven playing field. It's better for the game if the majority of raw gold is just generated by random players doing their dailies and killing mobs on their way to dungeons and stuff like that. That should be where the majority of raw gold is generated. So if we see some crazy AoE farming methods, boosting, stuff like the Mara runs make a return in TBC, then we'll continue to see like just a rampant increase in the gold supply of the game. And that will mean that there will be more and more rich players, more and more players with absolutely crazy gold stockpiles, who can then afford to splash tons of gold on gold DKP runs, and who will also eventually be in a position where it will make a lot of logical sense for them to break the terms of service and sell their gold. Because they'll have so much gold, they'll be like, what? I'm never going to be able to use this in game. And then it's some people will consider it, and then you'll also have, obviously, the, as far as I know, allowed practice of trading gold between retail and classic, which already allows people to buy gold, as far as I know, without breaking the terms of service directly. If you just buy a token, turn it into retail gold, find someone who's willing to trade classic gold for your retail gold. You do that trade. I'm not sure how safe they are. I have no idea. There could definitely be some things in the terms of service disallowing this, but this has been a practice for a very long time, including like big time streamers advertising on their, just having a little bit of a text box on their screen where they say that they're looking to get gold on a specific classic realm, and they're willing to trade their retail gold to get it. So people they can just buy tokens from Blizzard, turn it into gold on retail, turn that gold into gold on classic, without touching the botting economy or like actual disallowed RMT. So for the people who want a pure classic experience without the token, sadly you won't get that. And even back in classic, actual vanilla, people were buying gold. In fact, it was probably easier to get away with gold buying and real money trading back then. I remember I've known many players who were into that side of the game, or who had an encounter with that side of the game. Now, all that being said, there's definitely going to be a gold rush in Classic soon, in TBC Classic. I think for many people, it will be a huge advantage to go into TBC with a little bit of a war chest, just because you can expect prices to be very high. So if you want to power level professions, that's going to be very expensive. If you want to gear up your character, that's going to be very expensive. If you just want epic flying early on, that's also going to be quite expensive. Now, I think material flipping should work really well on Classic right now, particularly if you focus on the profession materials, for the professions that you know that TBC players are going to want at max. So this is enchanting, for they have ring enchants, jewel crafting that no one can level yet. Those are some of the top ones. Leatherworking, tailoring, of course, as well. There's definitely loads of people planning to do multiple tailoring alts for the daily cooldowns. So all of those types of materials, definitely items that you can start flipping, just buying at 80% DB market and trying to sell at 100. And if you don't sell them off right away, then long or medium term, you should still be able to sell them for quite a lot more. Once people realize that they need to get their materials now, or it's going to be too late. But we'll see. Definitely TBC launch is going to be fun. I think there's a lot of classic players who are not necessarily used to an expansion launch period. So there will be some opportunities there. So definitely check that out. Take a look at what's happened over expansion launches in retail with prices. You can use the Undermine Journal for that. The general trend we'll see is that prices go up quite significantly, are super high for all of the materials, and then they trend downwards. Is what we expect to see. But inflation is once again the big joker, as I talked about in this entire episode, with the gold DKP and the bots and the entire economy. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I think all of the people doing all the testing with AoE farming and all of that stuff is definitely going to have a huge impact on the economy. And without having any actual insights into botting at all, because I don't even check how many. I know the people are checking how many ungilded druids are in Stratholme and stuff like that, and whatever the bots are doing. But personally, just a huge amount of render gold is being generated by legitimate players as well. It's not just the bots' fault that the economy is destroyed or broken or whatever in Classic. it is what you could have expected to see if you'd really thought it through ahead of time. So yeah, I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be, but I'm not a hardcore classic player, so I'm sure some people will disagree with me, and some people I might be completely wrong, of course, about the scale of the botting problem. I'll admit that. But yeah, guys, that's it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did and you want to read about gold making, then head over to thelazygoldmaker.com. If you want to watch the show live, you can do so at twitch.tv/lazygoldmaker. And if you want to support me, you can do so at patreon.com/thelazygoldmaker. With that, I wish you all a very profitable week. Goodbye, guys.